We wanted to extend another warm welcome on behalf of Meiju, the Google Certified Trainer Program owner. She's been keeping an eye on the work that you have done collaboratively in your groups and wanted us to tell you how excited she is about the work that you are doing. And as a reminder, we are your facilitators for today. My name is Diane Rutherford, and I have my colleague Quinn Henderson here with me today. We are both education leads at Future Design School and have the absolute privilege of working with educators like yourselves to reimagine education. So we again will be facilitating today's session, and Quinn's just dropped our Twitter handles into the chat. Feel free to drop yours in as well as a link for questions. So we will be hosting a Q&A session at the end, and so feel free to post your questions in that form. So before we dig in, we just wanted to take a moment to recap session 1. And the goals and objectives remain the same for this session as they were in our first session together, which, just as a reminder, are to provide you with a hands-on experience with Google tools to support best practices for remote learning, provide you with inspiration for leveraging Google tools to enhance teaching and learning and assessment practices in a remote setting, to develop strategies to help you train others on leveraging G Suite tools for teaching, learning, and assessment. And of course, we hope that you use this as an opportunity to build connections with your peers. Already lots of great networking going on within the chat, so definitely keep that up. We also dug into the tenets of exceptional learning, and we called out 3 specifically. So in that first session, we really looked at creating exceptional learning in the form of problem-driven learning that incorporates student choice and voice while leveraging the G Suite tools. So today what we want to do is really focus in on that third tenet of ongoing assessment and consider how the tools can be used effectively to inform assessment practices. We also talked about the spectrum of educators that we work with and how to effectively scaffold the learning and integration of G Suite tools to ensure we are effectively supporting them in this transition to remote learning. So this is where we introduce those G Suite scenario challenge cards. Again, it's a resource for you to use to support the teachers that you are working with in your trainings. And those are available on your resource hub. And we've got more things to share with you towards the end of the session as well. So with the learning from the previous session in mind, today we are going to focus on assessment in a remote setting. But before we really dig into assessment, we want to take a moment and set a bit of context. At this moment, the world's education system is facing an unprecedented time. Our entire classrooms have had to shift from an in-person model to one that is online with virtually little to no prep time for how to adapt our teaching practice. We have had to consider not only how to teach online, but also how to assess online. And of course, while it goes without saying that this shift has been challenging, we also recognize that it's been a huge opportunity to take a step back and think about how to meaningfully evolve our assessment practices. So we are living now in an education world that is unknown, and we do not know what assessment is going to look like going forward. What we do know, however, is that great assessment is meant to focus more on the process or a student's learning journey and less on that final product. It should be about the development of transferability of skills and competencies to help inform our teaching. And finally, great assessment should be used as a method to inspire students to continue to pursue their learning. And this is really what we get to dig into today. So I'm going to pass it on over to Quinn, who's going to take us through that first activity.
Awesome. Thanks, Diane. It's great to be back with all of you again today. So I hope you're having a great week. And to begin thinking about assessment, we're going to participate in another collaborative brainstorm similar to what we did last time. So, however, we're going to change things up a bit today, and we're going to use Jamboard. And so I know what some of you might be thinking in regard to Jamboard. You're not sure if it's enabled for your domain or maybe it's blocked on your domain. So regardless, we've made the files accessible through any Google account. So be able to jump over to an incognito window and access the collaboration files with outside of your domain account if you're blocked. Or if you happen to be on a school or district managed device that's not going to allow you to open an incognito window, or switch accounts to join the file, we'll also have a collaborative Google Doc that you'll be able to jump in with. And another note about Jamboard, it's come up in the previous sessions as to whether or not Jamboard is covered under the G Suite for Education Terms of Service. And the answer is yes. So it's not enabled by default, so your admin would need to enable that if they haven't already, but the Jamboard web app and mobile app are free, and you can also find those apps for mobile devices in any of the app stores. So before we start collaborating on Jamboard, let's highlight what you will be collaborating on. There are going to be two questions. The first question we want your collaboration on and your brainstorming around is, what is the purpose of assessment? And we really want you to think of this in a very general sense. So why do we have it, and what is its value? So that's the first question that you'll find on the Jamboard. The second question that we want you to think about is in the context of remote learning. So what have you seen, or are you seeing, in terms of the challenges that teachers are facing with remote assessment? So as you put down your ideas, be sure to think back to the types of people that you are supporting. As Diane pointed out just a moment ago, those early adopters, those laggards, that mushy middle. Think about all of those as you do that. So you're going to find, to pull up your Jamboard files, we're going to visit our resource hub, and Diane's dropped a link into the chat. You can click that link, and you're going to see that there's an assessment page on the resource hub now. And you'll find, again, your group assignments on the blue button. That will open up the same group assignments from our previous session. You're more than welcome to stick with the same groups, or if you weren't in the previous session, just make sure you add your name to one of the groups. Once you are in your group assignments and locate your group, you're going to find the Activity 3, a case for assessment, yellow box, and click on the link in that box, and that will open up your Jamboard file. And when you get to your Jamboard file, you'll notice there are 2 frames, and you can toggle between those frames with the arrows at the top. And you'll have the first question, what is the purpose of assessment? Then on the second frame, you will have the challenges related to remote assessment. And what we want you to do is just put one idea per sticky note on each of those, and be sure to go back and forth. We're going to give you about 8 minutes to collaborate and come up with as many thoughts and ideas as you possibly can around assessment, and then we'll start to dive and dig into those a little bit deeper. Post any questions or challenges that you have in accessing the files right here in the chat, and we'll be sure to address those. But we'll go ahead and start the clock, and you can start collaborating and posting your thoughts on assessment. For those of you not able to access Jamboard, I'm going to drop a link to a collaborative Google Doc in the chat, and you're welcome to use that.
Just a reminder, there are 2 frames per Jam file there. So the first frame is, what is the purpose of assessment? And then that second frame is, what have you seen in terms of challenges that teachers are facing with remote assessment? So you may want to split your time and spend half of it on the first question, half on the second, and spread yourself out if it's getting a little busy on that one particular file there. Lots of really great ideas coming in. It's funny, not a single Jam file that I'm on here has, in terms of the purpose of assessment, to be to receive a grade or a mark. So lots of really, really great ideas coming in here. If you feel like you're not you've kind of exhausted all of your ideas, feel free to jump into one of the other groups' Jamboard files, see what they've come up with, and you may want to start responding to some of the ideas that they've developed within their own Jam files, again, by just using another sticky note, or you can put a check mark or use a sticker on one of their notes, or you might want to take some of those ideas and bring them back to your own groups. So feel free to explore the others if you'd like.
All right, we're down to our final seconds. So wrap up whatever thought that you're working on there, and start to make your way back to the meet. And we'll start to explore some of the ideas that came in there. All right, while you were all working on that, you probably saw Diane and I jumping in and out and dragging around all of the Post-its. I love to see at the very end everybody popping in and out of the other groups to see what they've put down. So we were organizing and really trying to collect the common themes to get kind of an understanding. And so what I'm going to look at, what I'm going to share is some of the things that we were able to come up with. So let's first take a look at really what the purpose of assessment is. And some of the common themes that we saw there were really assessing mastery of content, inform future instruction, identify student strengths and opportunities for growth, to inform a roadmap of progression of the student's learning journey, ensure the learning goals have been met, make learning visible, celebrate skill and competency development, support planning for teachers, understand the gaps. So all really good ideas around really what the purpose of assessment is. And I like how Diane pointed out earlier that it wasn't to get grades, to get marks. So assessment is definitely so much more than that, and such a good opportunity. When we look at some of the challenges that teachers are facing with remote assessment, some of the things that we saw were accommodations for students with IEPs. Definitely a big challenge. Teachers are hesitant to move away from the paper and pencil way of doing things, like tests. I thought this is really good, is teachers are unfamiliar with the tools like Kahoot or quizzes, and there's too many platforms for teachers to work with and share with students. They can easily become overwhelmed, right? It's not necessarily about getting access to more apps as much as it is to understanding what tools are available and focusing maybe on a few. I also saw in there as well, somebody talking about the understanding of how to assess using a particular tool, and gave the example of Google Forms, or they only know one way or one tool to use to assess. So important to think about how do we vary the assessments for the students and the different types of feedback that those varied assessments can give us. Also, uncertainty of how to gather real data from home assessments. And there were a lot around this, and this was kind of the idea of cheating or fear of parents doing the work for their child. How do we really validate that the students are doing that work? And then also lack of real-time data to adjust instruction. So I wish we had more time to dive into like each and every one of these, especially thinking about really what's the goal and purpose of assessment, and then the challenges. But unfortunately, we don't have that kind of time today. But we'll give you an opportunity in the next brainstorm to think about how we can use those G Suite tools to overcome some of those barriers. And your wheels might already be turning on how to do that. I also want to point out a couple of notes that around Jamboard and using this as a collaboration tool. And you can access this as long as it's open on your domain or outside of your domain at jamboard.google.com. And I usually get the question of how I got the text into the Jamboard, but I used the mobile app when I did that. So I actually used my iPad in the mobile app to use the pen text recognition pen tool, so I could write in that text. So you get a couple of different features using both of those different applications or different ways to use it. And then I've also used this. It's a great tool for a whiteboard tool, especially in a remote learning situation. So a little bit later, I'm going to drop in some links that will give you some more information or context around Jamboard that you might be able to use for future trainings with your teachers. So now that we have zeroed in on some of the challenges and what the purpose of assessment is, we'll zero in on how the G Suite tools can help educators overcome those barriers. And really the goal is to flip the traditional assessment practices on their head. And then how do we collect assessment evidence in a variety of areas? So this will really help build on what we covered in the last session around the tenets of exceptional learning. And as Diane pointed out at the very beginning of this session, those tenets were problem-driven learning and student choice and voice. So today we're going to focus on that blue one of ongoing assessment. When we look at ongoing assessment, that really means that the learning incorporates multiple checkpoints in varied types of assessment. And these types of assessment include the opportunities for assessment of learning, assessment as learning, and assessment for learning. In addition, it's important that the evidence is gathered in a number of different ways, and that's mainly through conversations and observations and products, which we'll talk about more here in just a moment. But gathering that evidence in a variety of ways really ensures that the learning process is valued over that final product. Also, when it comes to ongoing assessment, there are several key components that really help drive effective ongoing assessment in a remote setting. And as we mentioned just a moment ago, that's gathering multiple forms of evidence, but it also means being present and having frequent check-ins with your students and engaging in regular feedback cycles. And I think some of those were even called out as some of the barriers or challenges when it comes to effective online remote assessment. So we can definitely account for those for some of the G Suite tools. And you've probably already started to think about how the G Suite tools can address these key components, and you'll have an opportunity to brainstorm more of those ideas in a minute. I want to go back to gathering multiple forms of evidence that we've mentioned a couple of times here. And typically when we think of assessment, our mind tends to go towards the products, where we want students to create a model or write a quiz or be in some kind of exam-based situation. At Future Design School, we talk about assessment as a journey. So with journey-based assessment, the focus is on the process as opposed to the product. And so we look at gathering evidence through multiple forms or inputs. And by leveraging this triangulation of evidence, we really give students great opportunities to shine in different ways by allowing them to demonstrate their strengths in their own learning journey. So let's look at these multiple forms of evidence, because they really allow teachers to look at students' progress over time and to provide greater depth in assessing their growth. So using multiple forms of evidence increases the reliability and validity of student learning. And it also highlights learning as a journey or a process. So as you're gathering evidence through conversations, which we refer to as the talk, and those could be informal and formal conversations, or we talk about the observations, right? Those are all the actions of the students and how students are interacting with the content. And also through the products, which we determine are the things or the tangible products and application of their learning. Right, so those will all highlight the learning journey, or collecting each bit of those. So in just a moment, we're going to look at how we can gather conversation, observation, and product-based assessment using the G Suite tools. But this is usually the point where we start to get questions or people asking for examples, and sometimes that comes at the end. So I think it's probably good to address that. So I'm going to put Diane on the spot. Sorry to do this, Diane. I'm going to put you on the spot, and hopefully, hoping you can share some of the examples of conversation, observation, and product-based assessments.
No problem. So when we're thinking about conversation-based assessments, it really could be in the form of teacher and student feedback. So for example, using something like a Google Meet or chat, or even just using the comments feature on G Suite tools is a really great way to have that dialogue between teachers and students. But again, not just limiting assessment to teacher-student feedback, but thinking also about that peer-to-peer feedback and also that self-assessment piece as well. So having students reflect on the feedback that they are getting through those conversations. Or you may set students up with a remote think, pair, share activity that they could go through using chat or groups, or simply just journaling or using email chains is a really helpful way to have those conversation-based assessments. In terms of observations, observation-based assessments are a great way to assess performance tasks, skill development, or just to get a good look at the learning process. So for example, you may use groups or collaborative tools again, like Docs or Jamboard or Slides, to assess students' problem solving or group work skills. And then finally, with those product-based assessments, it's a really great way to bring in that student choice and voice component. So this could be anything from a lab report, a performance, a portfolio, a prototype. I think the key thing to remember, especially with those product-based assessments, is that products don't just come at the end of the learning cycle. So it's not all about this culminating task piece, but it has the flexibility to be woven throughout, and really finding those touch points and entry points for conversations and observations and those products will really paint a holistic assessment journey for a student. So I hope that helps with some examples. So I'll pass back to Quinn.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really makes me think that, teachers are probably doing a lot of things already that if they just had the opportunity to reflect for a minute and recognize that what they're doing is assessing. And when you're talking about really the comments through all of the different docs and the applications, that's a type of assessment. So it's a great opportunity to collect that and watch the student growth. And even what you said about the products, not just the very end product, but there are products throughout, or different shapes that product takes. And that really helps tell a story as well. So very, very helpful. We could probably spend a lot of time just digging really deep into a lot of different examples, but unfortunately, we don't have that kind of time. And we encourage you, all of you, in the groups that you've created and the conversations that you've started with each other, to continue to share those examples. And we'll have some ways for you to stay connected a little bit later. So some of the best practice for ongoing assessment is to really value the learning process of each individual. And we know that student choice and voice is highly important in the assessment process. And it really gives them the opportunity to demonstrate their learning in a way that fully demonstrates their understanding and ability. So gathering multiple forms of evidence can be effectively supported with a lot of the G Suite tools, not only through gathering information around a student's learning journey, but also through the tracking and sharing of students' growth and progress with different stakeholders. So imagine really how that really helps support things like parent-teacher conferences. So let's touch just on a few, especially when we talk about being present, continuing to build on that best practice. And really great assessment means being present and invested in students' learning process. So being able to support students throughout the process, as opposed to only at the end of the learning cycle, will allow them to identify on their own opportunities for growth more frequently. And we can leverage tools like Calendar, Meet, and Chat, and Gmail. And that really is going to support all of the stakeholders, including students and teachers and parents, in the opportunity to be present through the whole assessment journey. When you look at frequent check-ins, you can look at tools like Google Meets and Forms. Those really provide great, simple ways to do those frequent check-ins with students as a quick formative assessment. And check-ins, we know right now in this particular time, are extremely important to keep students engaged. And these check-ins, you can think about them being synchronous or asynchronous. So the timing of that could be very different. And that's very important to accommodate students in this particular time. And so we also know that there are a lot of opportunities for regular feedback cycles with the G Suite tools. And these can take the form of informal or formal feedback. Tools like Meet or Classroom, that might constitute more formalized feedback, whereas the comments that Diane mentioned in her examples of docs and sheets and slides, it allows for more informal and timely and continuous feedback as well. So consider again all of the users that you work with, all of the educators that you're supporting with G Suite tools, and keep in mind their needs as we start to think about supporting them in their assessment practices in a remote setting. And as a reminder, if you think back to where they fall in that spectrum of learning, whether they may identify as early adopters or the mushy middle or the laggards, right? Understanding where they're at will help you to adequately support them in creating exceptional assessment practice in a remote setting. So now it's time to shift gears, now that we've set the stage and really thought deeply about assessment, to think about the tools. And for that, I'm going to pass it back to Diane.
Thank you. So in a moment, you are going to break back out into your collaborative spaces to consider how leveraging the G Suite tools can drive those meaningful ongoing assessment practices in a remote setting. So to support this activity, we have presented you with a scenario to work with. And the scenario is Miss Stryker is a middle school math and science teacher. She is about to assign her students an inquiry project that looks at designing a structure that withstands a natural disaster in a chosen location. However, she is unsure of how to meaningfully assess their work in a remote setting. So that again is bringing in those two previous tenets of exceptional learning from session 1 that we discussed, that problem-driven and student choice and voice. So what we want you to do in this moment is to consider the scenario. And then in your groups, brainstorm ideas for how G Suite tools are leveraged to support conversation, observation, and product-based assessments. So we don't want you to just write down the tools and that support the gathering of evidence, but rather how they are used to gather things like conversations, observations, and products. So as you are brainstorming, keep in mind the best practices for assessment, including being present, having frequent check-ins, and engaging in regular feedback cycles. And then, of course, as you are brainstorming your ideas, you want to keep your users in mind. So think about the educators that you are working with throughout your trainings, and think of the ones that are highly proficient or early adopters at leveraging G Suite tools, those that may fall under the mushy middle category, and then those who are beginners at leveraging the G Suite tools. So how they leverage the tools will look different for each user group. So it's really important to consider their unmet needs. So what we want you to do is back into your resource hub and your group assignments page, click on activity 4, which is that green box there. And it's going to open up a document for you. And on that document, you're going to see a table. And on the left-hand side, you will see a list of G Suite tools. And then you will see beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So thinking about all of those different tools, how can they be leveraged to help drive effective conversation, observation, and product-based assessments? Again, we've put the scenario there for you if you want something tangible to kind of sink your teeth into as you're working through, or you can also think more generally in the sense of these assessments. But we'll give you another 8 minutes to work on these, and you may begin. All right, starting to wrap up those ideas. And when you've put down your last thought, if you want to leave that document behind for a moment and jump back into the meat here, we will keep going. So you probably noticed Quinn and I were jumping between the different documents that you had going on there. And you've come up with some really, really great ideas for how these tools can really help drive these meaningful assessment practices. I just wanted to take a moment and share a couple. And of course, just remind you again that all of the documents are dynamic. So you can continue to add to them even after today's session, and you will be able to refer back to them as long as you would like, and not just for your own particular group, but for all of the groups that are in your particular cohort. So lots of ideas and lots to kind of go through and pull out some ideas for how you want to bring these back to your own classroom, depending on your role, or to the training sessions with the teachers that you are working with. But in terms of some ideas that I just wanted to highlight. A couple people wrote groups for discussion boards, using Classroom to have rubrics for students to either self-assess against, or again, really great tool for that peer assessment piece. Using sites for e-portfolios, again, back to groups for threaded discussions, using sheets for grade books and using hyperdocs throughout the process. Again, a project management template is a really powerful tool to use with students, and that can be created through sheets or through docs, and it will allow you to provide feedback and assess student growth. Super great tool for conversation and observations. You could use forms to connect with sheets and Autocrat to populate completed rubrics that are sent back to individual students. Somebody wrote for slides, a student could write up a lab report and embed a video that shows them testing their hypothesis. Again, really great opportunity to document the process and have a couple of different assessments in terms of product-based observation and conversations interwoven in throughout the whole piece here. And then another was simply sharing of ideas. So if you had a document, perhaps, maybe assigning each student a different color to really get evidence of their participation on that particular topic. But we know, again, that creating exceptional learning experiences for students is informed by the triangulation of evidence. And conversation, observation, and product-based assessments drive learning forward and demonstrate true progression of skills. So the ideas that you came up with will help you support the work you do with educators around assessment in a remote setting. And again, we're just going to keep reiterating to revisit your group's documents, to revisit those Jamboards, and to really leverage that resource hub and the community that we've created through this cohort. And we'll continue to talk about how to remain connected after. But we've also created another resource to support your trainings that you're doing with educators. So I'm going to pass it back to Quinn, who will help outline that.
Awesome. Yeah, great work in the collaboration. Yeah, be sure to use those. And coming up here in just a few minutes, it's already been 46 minutes. Time definitely flies when we're doing this, but we'll show you here in just a minute how to access a certificate for your participation in the training that will be helpful for reporting your professional development for your school or district. So hang tight for that. But as Diane mentioned, we want to provide you with a resource to further support all of the work that you've just done. And what we've done is we've created a resource assessment cards. And you'll each get a copy of these assessment cards. And again, I'll turn that link on in the resource hub at the end of this session. But these assessment cards come with some overall questions for educators to consider around assessment, and really prompting questions for conversation, observation, and product-based assessments, as well as some examples for how G Suite tools can be used to support the gathering of evidence. So let's take a look at the cards. The cards are really meant to really get you started, to be used with the resource for teachers. However, we also encourage you to really leverage the ideas that you just came up with in the brainstorm in your group to continue to build on these cards. There'll be a way to submit and add to the cards or add directly to your copy. And so the first card that you see is this yellow card, and this is a prompt card to really get teachers reflecting on the learning experiences they've created for students, taking into account the tenets of exceptional learning. So this includes whether the experience is problem-driven, if there are opportunities for student choice and voice, what checkpoints have been included for feedback, what's the balance of observations, conversations, and product-based assessments, and where these assessments might fall in the learning journey. So you can see just a minute on this card, thinking about the learning experience that you created will help you understand, okay, where do I fall when it comes to assessment, and where are my opportunities? So these considerations will really help determine how to create, or the next step in creating, more meaningful assessment, and take into account the qualities of journey-based assessment. When we look at the other cards in the deck, you're going to see that you'll have a green, a red, and a blue card. And each of those represent the different forms of evidence that we've discussed here today that could be used as assessment. And on the front of the card is a brief description of that particular assessment. In this case, we're looking at the conversation card. And on the back, you'll see some prompting questions that drive that particular type of assessment, and then some of the G Suite tools that can help a teacher gather this form of evidence. So here you can see that we've identified Meet and Chat conversations, as well as the comment feature in Docs and Slides and Sheets, as a way to collect those conversation-based evidence. So you can see you could easily create another conversation-based card based on what you're seeing or what your teachers might need. So those are the cards that you're going to get, and you'll have access to those on the resource hub. We'll activate that here in just a minute. And this group is extremely savvy, as you've showed in the comments and the work that you've done in the Brainstorm. And so we really challenge you to share your ideas that you developed with the others. And you'll have an opportunity to submit to the master deck through the resource hub as well. We'll provide a link to the form. So already we are nearing the end. So it's a good opportunity to really recap and recognize the work that you've done before we move on to the questions and get you to your certificate. And so let's look at what we've done. You've collaborated in groups to brainstorm both the purpose of assessment and any challenges that teachers are facing with remote assessment. You explored the best practices of assessment and looked at the role of conversations, observations, and products, and what the role that they play in shaping a student's learning journey. You revisited the different types of users and educators that you work with, and really how it's important to consider their needs when engaging with training. And then finally, you did some brainstorming on how we might leverage the G Suite tools to drive exceptional assessment practices in a remote setting by digging into a scenario that we asked you to brainstorm ideas around, and the different tools and how they drive conversations, observations, and products in a learning setting. And like we said, that's a great place to go back if you're looking for ideas on conversations, observations, or products, and how to leverage those with the tools. So as we come near the end, many of you have been submitting questions through the forum and in the chat, and we've been keeping an eye on those. And so now would be a great time, Diane, if we have any of those questions, to address those.
Yes, absolutely. I'm not sure we're going to be able to get through all of them, unfortunately, but we will try to address as many as we can in the next few minutes here. So the first question is, how can one use Google Groups for assessment?
That's a really good question. I really like Google Groups when we're thinking about assessment. Most of us like to think about Google Groups as a way to have those threaded discussions. I think somebody was pointing that out in some of the brainstorms. But when students are posting, even in those threaded discussions, that's a great way to collect evidence. And you can collect evidence in conversations, observations, and products all through Google Groups. And I like the threaded idea because then you can really organize around a particular topic and assess a little bit deeper on a student's knowledge or progress in that particular thread. And one of the things that I would really look for or think about in assessment and Google Groups is, first of all, who's asking all of the questions? If the student is asking a lot of the questions, and that's the way that they engage, then there might be an opportunity to provide more support or resources for that particular student. And if students have the opportunity to answer each other's questions, which I think is a great opportunity to test their knowledge and to assess where they're at, are they always the ones answering the questions? And what type of language and vocabulary are they using? Are they actually getting the concepts? So I think those are two really important things to think about, or ways to assess even using Google Groups. I think the third part of that is what students aren't engaging in asking questions or answering questions for other students. That might tell you a lot about there needs to be a check-in with that student so I can assess or find a better channel to assess for that student, especially in remote settings. So I think Google Groups is really a really powerful tool, and you can accomplish some of those same things through comments in Google Classroom or also comments in other sheets. But I think Google Groups lets you organize that really well. So good question.
Perfect. I'll ask one more here, and that question I'm actually going to put out to everybody in the group as well. What resources do all the on-the-ball trainers use to keep up with updates in such a timely manner? So feel free to drop some answers and suggestions in the group chat as well. Again, use this as an opportunity to share, and then Quinn, if you had one or two that you want to share as well, let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's such an important part of being a trainer, staying up to date. You're often just that resource for other teachers or that go-to person. And so being current is definitely helpful. The two main ways that come to mind right off the bat, we've already kind of covered in this session today, is the Google Trainer group, I think, is the primary source to find information. Searching through that group usually digs up all kinds of things. There's great, relevant, timely conversations always happening in that group. And then also is Twitter. And we all dropped our Twitter handles or Twitter links in there. If you haven't done that already, feel free to drop them in here. I think that's a really great way to build your professional learning community and connect with people that are helping you stay on top of those ideas. And I agree, Yvette, can be completely overwhelming. And it can completely suck you in at the same time. It can take a lot of your time. So 5 minutes in there can really go a long way and easily lead to another 10, 15, or 20 minutes. So those are the two primary ways that I like to do it. I also like to meet up with some of the other trainers in my area every once in a while when, of course, there aren't quarantines in place. I actually like to get together just with a few of them and talk about some of the things. That's a great way to go. So feel free to drop any other ways in the chat that you stay up to date. And I think that probably answers all of our questions that we have time for. Wish we had more time for more questions.
I know. Yeah, I'm just watching the clock here. So I think we're gonna have to move on to next steps for now. But again, we'll let you know how to stay connected in just a moment, where we can continue the dialogue and continue with some of these questions if you'd like. But first, we just really wanted to say a huge thank you to each and every one of you for joining us in these two sessions. Your enthusiasm through the chat is very evident, and the breakout sessions have been super incredible. And you've done some really amazing work. So we do hope that you have some ideas to take away and implement in your own trainings to support educators in driving these exceptional learning and meaningful assessment opportunities in a remote setting. So just a couple of reminders before we say goodbye in just a moment. This is your resource hub. So you will be able to access all the activities that you've completed in those past two sessions, and you will see more tabs being turned on for those assessment cards after this session. And again, you will have access to those assessment cards at your resource hub. So if you have an idea for assessment that you would like to submit, much like for the G Suite scenario challenge cards, you will be able to do so through this form. And of course, as a reminder, one of the best ways that you can provide product feedback is to use the help menu and select report a problem in almost all G Suite applications. We also encourage you to leave feedback for the products on the Jamboard file we've created, and we'll make sure to pass that along to May and the product teams. So again, one of the tabs in your resource hub is called product feedback that you can click on, and you will be taken to a Jamboard file where you can post your feature requests or bug issues throughout. And if you have any questions about the trainer program specifically, continue to use the trainer Google group to post questions and share resources and your own expertise. In terms of next steps, this is what we encourage you to do. So we hope that you test out some of these ideas with your own students, again, depending on your role, or with the educators that you are working with. We encourage you to track your trainings in the Edu Activity app. And we also ask you to complete the post-PD series survey. So this is a great exit ticket that we're going to ask you to do. And once you complete that feedback form, we will email you a certificate that might be helpful in tracking your professional development hours with your school or district. So we're going to give you a few minutes right now, and we'll drop that link into the chat for this feedback. And if you just hang tight, we have another way to stay connected in just one moment. So when you get, oops, that didn't, there it goes. So once you fill out that form, because there's quite a few of you on the call, it may just take a minute or two in lag time for that certificate to show up in your email, but it will be there. If it is not there within the next 10 minutes or so, then definitely reach out and let us know. We'll give you a minute to start with that. All right, so these are starting to come in, so you should be receiving those certificates. And again, if you're having any troubles, just feel free to drop a link or email us. But before we say goodbye, we have gotten a lot of questions about how to remain connected as a cohort after today's session ends. So as a result, we've actually created a Hangout chat for each cohort, and I've just dropped that link into the chat there. So to access your group, simply go to the link, and we will also send that link out in our follow-up email. But other than that, we just wanted to say thank you, stay healthy, stay safe, and it's been incredible having you in today's session and in our previous one as well. So we will see you soon.